Turn to your Bibles in Mark chapter 11. I'll admit that I had some difficulty on choosing the text for this evening. So I chose something that I was thinking through already. We're going to look at a parallel passage of what we've been studying on Sunday mornings, but we'll start with what we've been looking at. Mark chapter 11. The title of the challenge tonight is called Prayer That Moves Mountains. Prayer That Moves Mountains. So please turn to Mark chapter 11, beginning in verse 12. Now, just to set the stage again, Jesus has just went through the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, massive crowds cheering him on, and the atmosphere is electric. There's tension, there's excitement and expectation. Jesus goes into the temple at the end of the triumphal entry, and he looks at the outer court, the court of the Gentiles, and then he leaves and goes back to Bethany. And then what we have is what we find in Mark chapter 11. In the context of his rejection, Jesus teaches a faith lesson on prayer, which begins by the cursing of a fig tree. All right, so look at Mark chapter 11, beginning in verse 12. This is after he has the triumphal entry the day before, and this is the morning of the next day. And on the morning, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came, if haply he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. And Jesus answered and said unto him, No man eat fruit of thee hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. So we'll skip to verse 19 now, for the sake of time. And between verses 15 and 18, Jesus cleanses the temple and teaches in the temple practically all the day. And then we have verse 19. Go to Mark 11:19. And when the evening was come, he went out of the city. And in the morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, calling to remembrance, said unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursed is withered away. And Jesus answering said unto them, Have faith in God. For verily I say unto you, that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever you desire when you pray, believe that you receive them, and ye shall have them. And when you stand praying, forgive, if ye have aught against any, that your Father also which is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father which is in heaven forgive your trespasses. So there's an allusion here to a prayer that moves mountains. And let's look at, I don't want to spend too much time in Mark because that's what we'll be doing Sunday morning. Turn to the parallel passage in Matthew 21. Matthew 21, 18 to 22. So Matthew is describing it from his perspective. Mark just described it from his or Peter's perspective. Now this is what Matthew writes in Matthew 21, verse 18. It's the parallel passage. It's a little shorter, but it has different details. Matthew 21, verse 18 begins, Now in the morning, as he returned into the city, he hungered. And when he saw a fig tree in the way, he came to it and found nothing thereon, but leaves only, and said unto him, Let no fruit grow on thee henceforward forever. And presently the fig tree withered away. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, How soon is it that the fig tree withered away? Jesus answered and said unto them, Verily I say unto you, if ye have faith and doubt not, ye shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if ye shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. In all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive. So in the context here, we see Jesus hungering for fruit. He's going to Jerusalem in the morning after the cleansing of the temple, or after the triumphal entry. He comes in the morning and he finds a fig tree. There's no fruit on it, and so he curses it. That's what Peter says. And he finds, he says, let no fruit grow on you ever again, essentially. And so, according to Matthew, immediately the fig tree withered away. But according to Mark, remember, Mark, he went to the temple, cleansed it, came back. Okay, so there was action happening in between. Just to explain here, fig trees in the Bible lands produced an early edible fruit, nodules of some sort, where you could eat, and then the leaves would come, and then the actual figs would come later. Mark says it wasn't the season for the figs now, yet Jesus curses it anyway. And I think the explanation is because there's kind of like a pre-fig, right? A fruit before the actual fruit comes. So if there is a nodule or fruit before the fig tree comes, then what the sign is, the pre-fig or the nodule, is a sign that later on fruit will manifest, or figs will manifest. What happened here is there is no pre-figs or pre-fruit nodules, so later on there will be no fruit, and so Jesus curses it. So he knows it's going to be barren, he curses it. He knows it's never going to bear figs, so he curses it, right? So most of the time in the Bible, Israel is given the symbolism of a vine or an olive tree or a fig tree. We'll find that in other passages in Luke, but there is some symbolism here in cursing the fig tree. The picture is this. When Jesus comes to the nation, there were leaves, right? It looked like it should bear fruit. It looked like there should be fruit, the nation itself. This speaks of a profession. You know, they look like they're believers, they talk like they're believers, or they believe in God, but there was no fruit for God. So Jesus was hungry from the fruit from the nation of Israel, but they had none. They rejected him. And in a sense, Jesus, or the symbolism is that the tree was a hypocrite, right? You expect to get figs from this tree. There's no fruit, no figs. And so it was promising much, but delivering nothing. That's the nation of Israel. They're promising that they are the people of God. The scribes, the chief priests, the Pharisees promise a way to God, but in fact, they're empty and fruitless. And so the picture is that Jesus condemns them as hypocrites and pretenders. And this is kind of a pre-picture of the judgment which would come in AD 70, 40 years later, roughly 40 years later. So they are judged. The nation is judged. There is no fruit. And so that's one picture, okay? This generation of Jews who rejected him are set aside a little later on. A remnant will believe after the rapture, but that's a different topic. So the picture here is that Israel should have had fruit. They didn't have fruit, and they were judged. What's true there is also true to us personally. You know, there's people in Christianity who profess to know Christ, who profess to be believers and followers of God, but have no fruit, and in the end, you know, their walk does not match their talk. And so in the end, they will be judged, truly judged. Remember, at the end, there will be a separation. Sheep and goats, wheat and weeds, true believers and unbelievers. So that's one picture. That's the symbolism in the fig tree. And now we move to Matthew 21 again. If you look back down in verse 20, this withered fig tree opens a discussion about prayer and faith. Faith and prayer to the God of the impossible in Matthew 21. And let me reread verse 20. Matthew 21:20. And when the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, "How soon is the fig tree withered away?" So they're amazed, but Jesus is not amazed. Verse 21, Jesus answered and said unto them, "Verily I say unto you, if you have faith and doubt not, you shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if you shall say unto this mountain, Be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. And all things whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive." So here he's talking about faith that moves mountains. And he moves from faith to prayer. Now, right after the destruction of the fig tree, the disciples are amazed. Everyone knows a fig tree doesn't die that quickly. It doesn't die overnight. If a tree has a blight, if it has if there's a drought, a tree usually takes days, weeks to eventually die. But this was unnatural. This happened overnight. very quickly in context here. And they're wondering, and Jesus is not wondering, and he gives us a lesson. He says, if you say to this mountain, okay, the phrase, if you say to this mountain, was something that was used during that day, that time. It was describing rabbis who can, quote, move mountains. In other words, there's a difficulty. They were rooters of mountains is the actual phrase that I think that is the expression that is being used or alluded to here. The picture is that this person can do the impossible. If you say to this mountain, be plucked up or cast out into the sea, and probably they're looking at the Mount of Olives and maybe have a view of the Dead Sea. Okay? And Jesus is using what's there to teach them, look, if you say to this mountain, be thou cast into the sea, it'll do what you have said. This phrase has bothered me, and it's bothered me for a long time. I have been, when I was a new Christian, I got into the name it, claim it theology. I didn't know anything from anything. And those guys were confident, those guys were excitable, and I just drew to them. I was drawn to them through that. So there's many extremes on how we view this passage. Okay, one extreme is the name it, claim it theology, where you know what, you speak reality in existence, you speak it, you name it, you claim it, it'll happen. That's one extreme. Some of the commentators that I studied this week just ignored this phrase altogether. So I didn't like that either. One man, Lawrence Richards, kind of explained it, and so I'm going to use what he said and try to explain it to you through his phrase. In the book, All the Prayers of the Bible, Lawrence Richards kind of explains this phrase here. If you say to this mountain, okay? Notice he doesn't say, if you pray to this mountain, or if you pray to God about this mountain, but if you speak the words to this mountain. Jesus spoke of commanding the mountain. You know, when we talk in modern thought, the material universe is real, and the spiritual universe is not real, right? It's all materialism. It's all the physical rather than spiritual. When a modern person wants to move a mountain, what do? They get some dynamite, right? Blow up the mountain and a bulldozer to pull away the mountain or the remnants or the rubble. I was given, during my birthday this past year, I was given a little birthday card that you can fold up, and it looks like a pair of binoculars, right? You can fold up. And they gave you a website that you could plug into your phone, right? So you get on the website, and you put the phone into this pair of binoculars, this viewing case, right? Like a viewfinder. Remember those things? They used to click, right? You click up the website, and this particular website picture was surfing, and you're in the tunnel. And what I was trying to do is give you a virtual reality. It had the music, it had the visuals, and it almost seemed like you were the one surfing in that big, huge wave with music and water sounds and all of that. Well, what that is what in trying to explain this here, the physical world gave birth to virtual reality, right? But really, the truth is this. How can I explain it? We are living in a digital simulation. The reality is the spiritual world. The spiritual world controls the physical world, the material world, right? And all we have to do is think of miracles, right? Joshua's miracle, the holding of the sun, all of the other miracles, right? We are living in a digital simulation, so to speak. Though our digital simulation, we try to create a virtual reality, but true reality is the spiritual realm. And so this is what Jesus is getting at here, right? The material universe is a derivative of the spiritual. This is what Lawrence Richards says. Yet the material universe is subject to the spiritual. And so Jesus is trying to teach through this phrase. It's a demonstration of this ultimate truth that spiritual takes priority over the material. So how do we have, from the spiritual realm, influence over the physical realm? How do we get that power? The disciples couldn't believe it, right? You just spoke to it, and it died, the fig tree. You spoke to it, and it died. So they couldn't understand, or they forgot already that he had given them power to overcome the physical realm, right? Sick people, diseased people were healed. Lame people were made to walk. He gave them power, authority over the physical, because he gave them the spiritual power, the reality of the spiritual power. And what was that spiritual power? It was him. He gives access into the spiritual realm that gives power over the physical realm. And so he goes on to say, right, that if you have faith and not doubt, faith moves you into the spiritual realm. Faith gives you access to God. The object of your faith is the issue. Not faith, not faith in my words, not faith in self, but faith in God. So if you have faith and you speak according to God's word, his will, that expression, if you say to this mountain, be thou removed and be cast into the sea, it'll do what you say. You'll have what you say. Did the disciples ever do that with a mountain? Did Jesus ever do that with a mountain? No. But I think in context here is the expression. Difficulties, mountains of difficulties, can be removed by faith. Right? By your faith is expressed by your words and your actions. Right? Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and they that love it shall eat the fruit thereof. In other words, your words matter because your words are an expression of your heart and your faith. Right? And so I happen to be somebody who typically has a good attitude. I have expectancy. I know God is working. I know God, and I know, yes, there's difficulties that churches face, that individuals face, but I believe we have access to the spiritual realm by Jesus Christ and to the throne room of grace. And because I do, I speak words of faith, believing, and doubt not. Right? That's what he says here. If you have faith and do not doubt, back in Matthew 21, if you have faith and doubt not, you shall not only do this which is done to the fig tree, but also if you shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, be thou cast into the sea, it shall be done. So what the New Testament teaches is this, that trust in God as he is known through Jesus gives us access to the spiritual realm and the power of God. And mountains can be removed because God moves the mountains. And I only believe what God says. And because I believe what God says, mountains of difficulties can be removed. I remember there's different circumstances in my life, I'm like, I don't see a way out. And what happens? There's a way out. God provides the way out, and the difficulty is removed. And I think that's the picture in the teaching here. You have access by faith as long as you do not doubt. Listen to what the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament says in regards to a double-minded man, a man who keeps, has faith, doesn't have faith, has faith, doesn't have faith. It says this, it says, faith is a specially religious phenomenon. And I'm quoting, in Mark 11:23 and Matthew 21:21, man has the promise of God and he clings to it when he speaks the word of faith to God or to the mountain. But he still thinks it is impossible or at least not certain. That which he says should be done. So he is at odds with himself. He believes, and yet he does not believe. James 1:6 gives us a vivid description of the man of prayer who is a diacrimenos, someone who is double-minded in his ways. He does not stand firm on the promise of God, but moves restlessly like a wave of the sea. He's double-minded and inconsistent in all his conduct. I remember reading part of not a documentary, a biography by Charles Spurgeon. And it was told that one time he turned around and spoke to the wall. And he says, be thou removed. He spoke to the wall. And then his church grew phenomenally. Now, I didn't understand that except in the context of this, say to this mountain. What he was saying is, I believe that God is going to grow my church. And we'll have to build a bigger wall, church. And again, it's having faith and not doubting. So Jesus' explaining is that because you have access to God by faith in the spiritual realm, the impossible becomes possible. So don't doubt. And let me just quickly finish this up here. If we speak words of faith and then we speak words of doubt, we go back and forth, the mountains will remain. In other words, if we doubt. But if we have faith, the mountains will be removed. The difficulties will be removed. So Jesus never experienced, the inner conflict that James 1 talks about. When Jesus spoke, it was always with total faith, unmixed with doubt. And so when he said, "No man shall eat of you anymore," what happened? It died, and no man could eat from it anymore. The fig tree. He had faith without doubting. And so difficulties can be removed by faith. We just keep shooting down the hole. We just keep focusing on on what the answer could be. And eventually, the impossible, by God's grace, becomes possible. So what do? You ask in prayer. You ask believing. And Jesus says at the end of Matthew 21:22, "And in all things whatsoever shall ask in prayer, believing, you shall receive." He promises us access to the one whom we know can do the impossible, whatever the impossible may be. The Expositor's Dictionary Bible Word says this as the last little thrust of truth here. It says about Matthew 21 and Mark 11, it says this: "In the gospel, one vital fact is made clear in Jesus' words about faith. A lack of trust in the God in whom we have faith closes off life's possibilities. When we fail to believe, we do not experience the full range of God's activity." In other words, we're up and down in faith, right? We're double-minded in our ways. We don't believe, and then we don't obey. But then we believe, and then we obey. And if you're up and down constantly, you're not going to see the full range of God's blessing or his activity in your life. But it goes on to say, "But when we trust, we open up our future to a full experience of God's power in and through us. All things are possible to the one who believes." The prayer that moves mountains is the one that has faith and doesn't doubt. It doesn't mean that we can say, "Okay, I'm going to win the lottery. I spoke that truth to an existence." That's not what it means. Why? Because that's not praying in faith. Praying in faith will pray God's will for your life. And back in Mark, he says, you know what he throws in while you're standing and praying? He says, "Forgive." He gives that condition, and when you're praying, goes, "Look, and if you don't forgive men their trespasses, the Father won't forgive you." So there are other conditions in receiving mountain-moving answers, in having prayers that move mountains of difficulties out of life by faith in God. So that's it for tonight. Praying in faith, believing that the impossible is made possible because you have access by faith into the throne room of God. And God answers. God makes the impossible possible. All right.